Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what happened 72 hours ago in low Earth orbit demands directness. Everyone is focused on the diplomatic negotiations in Geneva. Everyone is analyzing the latest sanctions package. Everyone is watching aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf. But that is not the real story. The real story is happening 550 kilometers above your head, and it changes the entire strategic calculation in the Middle East. I am looking at orbital data that has been circulating among American military analysts for the past 96 hours, and I need you to understand what it represents. What Iran launched is not a communication satellite. It is not a weather monitoring system. It is not a civilian research platform. What Iran launched is a constellation of 3 military reconnaissance satellites with synthetic aperture radar capabilities that can track surface vessels in real time through clouds, at night, in all weather conditions. And as of April 17, 2026, all 3 satellites are fully operational. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this represents the single most significant shift in naval power projection since the introduction of submarine warfare, why the United States Navy can no longer operate with the assumption of strategic surprise in the region, and why your gas prices are about to reflect a reality that most Americans do not yet understand. This is what happens when a regional power achieves what only 5 nations on Earth have managed to accomplish. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by Pentagon strategists, and you are not getting this level of technical analysis anywhere else in the mainstream media. Let's start with orbital mechanics, because understanding what Iran actually achieved requires understanding why this capability matters. A synthetic aperture radar satellite operates fundamentally differently from optical reconnaissance systems. Traditional spy satellites require clear weather and daylight. They can be evaded by timing naval movements for night operations or overcast conditions. Iran knew this. The United States Navy knew Iran knew this. For decades, American carrier strike groups operated in the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea with the understanding that they could avoid observation during significant portions of their operational window. Synthetic aperture radar changes that equation completely. These systems emit microwave pulses that penetrate clouds and operate identically at night. They detect the metallic signature and displacement patterns of surface vessels. The resolution achieved by modern SAR systems can identify not just the presence of a ship, but its class, its approximate tonnage, and in some cases, its specific configuration. To put that in technical terms, Iran now possesses what is called persistent maritime domain awareness across an area of approximately 5 million square kilometers. The 3 satellites Iran placed in orbit between March 28th and April 9th of this year are positioned in sun-synchronous orbits with a revisit time of approximately 4 to 6 hours for any given location in the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, the Arabian Sea, and the Northern Indian Ocean. That means every American surface vessel in that theater is being tracked, cataloged, and monitored every 4 to 6 hours with imagery that cannot be defeated by weather or darkness. Commander Sarah Chen, a senior analyst at the U.S. Naval War College, acknowledged in a March briefing that Iran's space program had reached what she called, and I am quoting her directly here, parity with regional powers in reconnaissance capability. According to spacetrack data compiled by the U.S. Space Command and confirmed by multiple independent satellite tracking organizations, the orbital parameters of these 3 satellites create overlapping coverage zones. This is not accidental. This represents sophisticated mission planning. Iran did not launch 3 satellites because it wanted redundancy. It launched 3 satellites because 3 satellites in properly coordinated orbits create continuous coverage with minimal gaps. The International Institute for Strategic Studies described this configuration in an April 12th analysis as constituting a genuine intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance network. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what Iran actually built, because the mainstream media coverage has been remarkably superficial. Announcement number 1, the Noor 4, Noor 5, and Qiyam satellites. And these 3 platforms matter more than anything else happening in space operations in this region right now. The Noor 4 satellite, launched on March 28th from Iran's Imam Khomeini Space Center, mass is approximately 220 kilograms and carries a synthetic aperture radar system with a reported resolution of 3 meters. That number matters. 3-meter resolution means the satellite can distinguish between a destroyer and a supply vessel. It can identify the presence of aircraft on a carrier deck. It can detect the deployment of smaller craft from amphibious assault ships. This is not theoretical capability. This is operational intelligence. The Noor 5 satellite followed on April 2nd with similar specifications, but positioned in a slightly different inclination to provide broader geographic coverage. The Qiyam satellite, launched April 9th using Iran's new Qiyam 100 solid-fuel launch vehicle, represents a significant technological leap. Defense Security Asia reported on April 14th that KEEM carries not only SAR, but also electronic intelligence gathering equipment capable of detecting and geolocating radar emissions from surface vessels. In practical terms, this means Iran can now passively detect American ships, even when those ships are attempting to maintain emissions control protocols. Bloomberg's defense correspondent noted on April 16th that U.S. Central Command had quietly altered patrol patterns for carrier strike groups operating in the region. That alteration was not random. It was a direct response to the operational reality that Iran now possesses continuous tracking capability. The United States Navy, for the first time in 4 decades of Persian Gulf operations, must assume it is being observed at all times. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the infrastructure Iran built to support this capability. This is the part that reveals long-term strategic planning rather than opportunistic technological advancement. Iran did not simply launch 3 satellites and hope for the best. Over the past 16 months, Iran constructed 4 ground stations with satellite communication capabilities, expanded its mission control center in Tehran, and established what Western intelligence sources describe as a dedicated military space operations command. Reuters reported on March 19th before the first launch that Iran had been recruiting aerospace engineers from Russia, China, and North Korea to staff these facilities. The ground stations are positioned in Kerman Province, Chabahar, Keshm Island, and near Bushehr. This geographic distribution is deliberate. It ensures that at least one ground station maintains line-of-sight communication with the satellites during every orbital pass over the region. The data latency, the time between satellite observation and delivery of processed imagery to military commanders, is reportedly under 40 minutes. That time frame is operationally relevant. Stay with me, because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implications for American naval operations become impossible to ignore. When you can track a carrier strike group in near real time, you can coordinate anti-ship missile batteries, deploy submarine assets to intercept courses, and position coastal defense systems with precision that was previously impossible. Iranian Defense Minister Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Ashtiani stated publicly on April 18th that Iran now possesses what he termed complete maritime domain awareness across its strategic theater. Western analysts initially dismissed this as propaganda. The orbital data suggests he was being accurate. The cost differential is staggering. The 3 satellites, the launch vehicles, and the ground infrastructure together cost Iran an estimated $400 million to $600 million. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the carrier currently operating in the region, cost $13 billion. Iran spent roughly 4% of the cost of a single American aircraft carrier to create a system that fundamentally changes how that carrier can operate. This is asymmetric warfare in its purest form. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The timing of these launches corresponds precisely with the expansion of Iran's anti-ship missile capabilities. Over the same 16-month period that Iran was building its satellite network, it was also deploying new variants of the Khalij Fars and Hormuz anti-ship ballistic missiles to coastal positions along the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman. These are not the older generation missiles that U.S. Navy Aegis systems were designed to intercept. These are third-generation systems with terminal guidance packages that can receive mid-course updates from external targeting sources. Now think carefully about what that means. An anti-ship ballistic missile launched from Iranian territory has a flight time to targets in the central Persian Gulf of approximately 8 to 12 minutes. For decades, the challenge with these weapons was target acquisition. Radar systems have limited range. Patrol aircraft can be shot down. Human intelligence is unreliable. But satellite reconnaissance that provides target coordinates every 4 to 6 hours, combined with missiles that can receive updated targeting data during flight, solves the kill chain problem. The United States Navy has acknowledged this vulnerability. In a January 2026 report to Congress, U.S. Central Command stated that Iranian anti-access area denial capabilities had reached what they classified as Level 3 threat status. That designation had previously been reserved only for Chinese anti-ship systems in the South China Sea. The reason American carrier groups are now operating further from Iranian territorial waters is the same reason U.S. mission planners are recalculating risk assessments. When an adversary can see your ships continuously and possesses weapons that can be guided to those ships with external targeting updates, the calculus changes. The aircraft carrier is no longer an invulnerable symbol of American power projection. It becomes a $13 billion target that must be protected by operating at distances that reduce its own strike range and effectiveness. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The public story is about diplomatic efforts to revive the nuclear agreement, sanctions relief discussions, and regional stability frameworks. That story is real, but it is secondary. The primary story is about deterrence. Iran is systematically building capabilities designed not to win a conventional war against the United States, but to make the cost of American military action unacceptably high. The satellite network is a component of that deterrence architecture. Alongside the submarine fleet we discussed in previous analysis, the missile arsenal, the cyber capabilities, and the proxy networks throughout the region. Think carefully about what this represents. When a regional power achieves reliable strategic reconnaissance capability, when it can track the most powerful naval vessels ever built with systems that cannot be easily disabled, when it possesses weapons that can exploit that intelligence, the psychological dimension of deterrence shifts. American military planners must now account for the probability that any operation in the region will face prepared, forewarned opposition with detailed knowledge of American force dispositions. The European response has been telling. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom jointly issued a statement on April 15th calling for renewed dialogue and diplomatic engagement. That language is diplomatic code. What it actually means is that European powers assess the military balance in the Gulf has shifted to the point where military solutions carry risks that outweigh potential benefits. They are not making a moral argument. They are making a strategic assessment. Insurance markets are making the same assessment. Lloyd's of London increased premiums for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz by 23% in March, before these satellites were even operational. That increase was based on updated risk modeling that incorporated Iranian maritime surveillance capabilities. When insurance underwriters, people whose only concern is accurate risk assessment, price in a 23% probability increase, they are telling you something real about changed circumstances. If you own a business that relies on freight shipping from Asia, if you operate in energy markets, if you make purchasing decisions for companies dependent on Gulf supply chains, what is happening in low Earth orbit is not a foreign policy story. It is a cost of goods story. These satellites, these boring technical systems orbiting overhead, are pricing themselves into your quarterly reports and budget projections. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to World War II and the Battle of the Atlantic because the parallel is instructive. In 1939, the British Royal Navy was the most powerful naval force on Earth. It possessed more battleships, more cruisers, and more destroyers than any potential adversary. British naval doctrine assumed that control of the Atlantic was guaranteed by this material superiority. Then Germany deployed U-boats, submarines that could track British convoys and coordinate attacks using radio communication and basic reconnaissance. The submarines themselves were not individually powerful. They could not defeat British battleships in direct combat, but they could see the convoys, position themselves optimally, and attack at moments of vulnerability. The British response was to develop escort carriers, improve sonar, depth charges, and eventually radar systems and code-breaking capabilities. But for 3 years, from 1940 to 1943, Germany came very close to severing Britain's supply lines, despite having a tiny fraction of British naval tonnage. Why? Because intelligence and positioning defeated material superiority. A submarine that knows where you are and can position itself on your route is more valuable than a battleship that is looking in the wrong ocean. Iran is deploying the modern equivalent. The satellites are the reconnaissance U-boats. The anti-ship missiles are the torpedoes. The Persian Gulf is the Atlantic choke point. The United States Navy is materially superior in every measurable category, but Iran is not trying to achieve material parity. It is trying to achieve informational advantage and positional advantage. The parallel is not perfect, but the logic is identical. History suggests that the power with better intelligence and interior lines of communication possesses enormous advantages, even against larger forces. Iran has interior lines, it operates close to its own bases, and now it has comprehensive reconnaissance. The United States operates at the end of 7,000-mile supply lines, with forces that must assume continuous observation. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths forward because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. Diplomatic accommodation. The United States and Iran reach an agreement that addresses both nuclear concerns and regional security architecture. Iran limits certain missile programs and accepts enhanced monitoring. The United States reduces sanctions and acknowledges Iranian strategic interests. The satellite network remains operational, but is framed as a legitimate defensive capability. This path requires both sides to accept outcomes they would prefer to avoid, but it prevents escalation. The conditions required for Path 1 include significant political will in Washington to engage seriously rather than demand total capitulation, willingness in Tehran to accept verifiable limitations on some capabilities, and support from European and regional powers to broker and guarantee the arrangement. I would assess the probability of this path at approximately 25%. It is possible, but requires leadership that prioritizes strategic stability over domestic political considerations. Path 2. Manage competition and deterrence stability. Neither side reaches a comprehensive agreement, but both sides recognize the costs of military confrontation exceed any plausible benefits. The United States adjusts its force posture to account for Iranian reconnaissance capability, operates at greater distances, and invests in countermeasures. Iran continues developing its asymmetric capabilities, but avoids provocations that would trigger escalation. This becomes the new normal, a cold peace characterized by mutual deterrence. This path requires no agreement, only rational calculation of costs and benefits by both sides. The triggers for this path are simply the absence of diplomatic breakthrough combined with the absence of incidents that spiral into conflict. It is uncomfortable, expensive, and perpetually tense, but it is stable. I would assess the probability of Path 2 at approximately 60%. It is the default outcome if nothing dramatic changes. Path 3, escalation through miscalculation or deliberate choice. An incident occurs, a ship is damaged, personnel are killed, or one side decides to test the other's resolve through military action. Iran uses its satellite network to track American vessels and coordinate attacks on shipping or naval assets. The United States responds with strikes on Iranian military infrastructure, including attempts to disable the satellites or destroy ground stations. The conflict expands beyond anyone's initial intentions. The consequences of Path 3 include massive disruption to energy markets, potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz for weeks or months, significant casualties on both sides, and the possibility of regional conflagration involving multiple actors. The probability is difficult to assess because it depends on decisions not yet made and incidents not yet occurred, but I would place it at approximately 15%. Low probability but catastrophic consequences if it occurs. I think we are closer to Path 2 than the headlines suggest. The satellite launches, despite being presented in Iranian media as aggressive capability building, actually serve a deterrent function that could stabilize the situation. Iran now has the capability to see American forces, which means it has confidence it can respond to threats. Confidence in defensive capability often reduces the incentive for preemptive action. The United States Navy is adjusting its operational patterns, which suggests recognition of changed circumstances rather than preparation for imminent conflict. But Path 3 remains possible. The systems Iran has deployed are dual use. They provide defensive intelligence and offensive targeting with equal efficiency. If leadership in either capital decides that testing the other's resolve serves domestic political purposes, or if a mid-level commander misreads a situation, the capabilities now in place could enable rapid escalation. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, how does the United States maintain effective naval presence in the Gulf when that presence can be continuously monitored by an adversary? Second, what happens to global energy markets if insurance costs for Gulf shipping continue rising as Iran's reconnaissance capability is fully exploited? Third, can deterrence based on mutual vulnerability remain stable over years or decades, or does it inevitably collapse into confrontation? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me which path you assess as most likely. Tell me if there is a fourth path I have not considered. We will keep tracking every development in the Persian Gulf, Iranian space operations, and U.S. naval posture adjustments. That is what we do here every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand why gas prices keep climbing and why naval strategy is being fundamentally rewritten in real time. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update when we analyze Iran's next moves in this chess game. We will see you in the next analysis.